Hello, I'm Amanda with M.A.K.E Alaska, and today we are going to learn about the Northwestern University's free online nonprofit course put out by All-State Foundation Nonprofit Board Essentials. This course is all through video, so let's learn together. Welcome to Nonprofit Board Essentials. Whether you're a seasoned board member considering joining your first board or an executive director preparing your board for success, Nonprofit Board Essentials will help you strengthen your impact. Launched in partnership with and fully funded by the All-State Foundation, NBE is taught by Kellogg School of Management faculty and experienced nonprofit board members. The content includes dozens short videos, about 7 minutes each, on key topics in nonprofit board governance. Links to additional resources and applied thinking questions offer opportunities for a deeper dive. Designed for busy schedules, on-demand availability ensures you can access what you want when you need it. Select the topics most relevant to your goals and board responsibilities at your convenience. Welcome to this unique offering of the All-State Foundation Nonprofit Leadership Center. Getting started. First, they want us to do a survey, which I did yesterday. And then we have topics: governance fundamentals, your role, board structure, fundraising, finance, risks, perspectives. Let's go to governance fundamentals. And I am keeping track of what I have watched because it seems like there's quite a few videos, and I just want to make sure that I keep it organized. There are 8 videos. Objective: learn how nonprofit governance is different from corporate governance. Understand the essential functions of governing boards and the life cycle of boards. Gain access to principles of high-performing boards and strategies for inclusive and impactful board service. Overview of the nonprofit sector. Gain an understanding of the nonprofit sector, including size and breadth of the sector, the variety of nonprofit missions, sources of revenue, and trends that are important for board members to consider. Applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. As you consider the trends that are impacting the nonprofit sector, what are your areas of expertise and how can you bring your skills to the board table? What does this overview make you curious about? Explore the additional resources and videos on this page to go deeper. And we're going to make it to speed. Here we go.
I'm Liz Howard, the Executive Director of the Kellogg School Center for Nonprofit Management and a Clinical Professor at the Kellogg School. I am delighted to be with you to share an overview of the nonprofit sector as you consider your role as a prospective or current board member with an organization in the nonprofit sector. To be honest, the name of the sector is a little misleading. Nonprofit organizations still need to at least break even, if not make a profit, in order to stay in business. Your role as a board member and the board's collective role is to think about revenue and how to sustain the organization into the future. As we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about the size and breadth of the nonprofit sector. In the US today, there are almost 2 million nonprofit organizations. About 1.5 million of them are 501c3 organizations. That's an IRS classification, meaning tax exempt and tax deductible. In other words, if you make a contribution to a 501c3, you can deduct that from your federal taxes. And as a tax-exempt organization, these nonprofits do not pay many of the standard U.S. taxes. Our series, Nonprofit Board Essentials, focuses primarily on these 501c3 organizations. But there are other 501 classifications, which include associations, for example, your professional association, or maybe your condo board. It also could include private or family foundations and political advocacy groups. The nonprofit sector is somewhat unique to the United States, and our series is focused on U.S.-based nonprofit board governance. The other aspect of the nonprofit sector that is very broad is the mission focus of the nonprofits. The missions can range widely from social service and education to a variety of different mission-driven disciplines. A word about revenue. Nonprofit organizations have a wide variety of sources of revenue depending on their mission. They may have government grants, funding that comes from the US government, from a state government, from a local government, or even their municipality. That may be a contract to deliver a specific service, or funding that comes via a government official or a department. Many nonprofits rely on private philanthropy. This is what most of you think about, I think, when you talk about a nonprofit organization. This is philanthropic giving from individuals, foundations, and corporations. You may be surprised to learn that earned income is a significant percentage of the revenue for many nonprofit organizations. I think that makes sense when you think about hospitals, schools, universities, and other entities that charge a fee for their service. While this fee may not cover all of the costs, it does bring in revenue to the organization. Finally, the organization may have other investment income if it has an endowment or some other type of investment vehicle. We'll address a variety of these revenue streams throughout the modules, particularly the nonprofit finance module. There are several trends in the nonprofit sector that you, as a board member, should be aware of and potentially thinking about collectively as the board of a nonprofit. First, increased competition. Though we in the nonprofit sector don't like to talk about competition, there are in fact more nonprofits out there today than ever before, and there is a blurred line between doing good as a nonprofit and a general concept of doing good. There are lots of organizations serving a social mission today, which increases the competition for many of our nonprofit organizations. We also have shifting priorities among our donors. Our donors are very strategic, and they are thinking about lots of different things as they identify where to direct their donations. A second trend that our nonprofit organizations need to be aware of today is the economic challenge that many organizations are facing. Rising operating costs and inflation have impacted all of us, our nonprofits as well as our donors. A third challenge or trend to watch is the ability of the nonprofit to attract and retain high-performing staff and volunteers. Those volunteers would be at your board level as well as at the actual direct service level. For paid staff, there is lots of conversation about the need to pay our people competitively across the organization. That is a hallmark of a successful organization, is the ability to attract and retain competent staff delivering on the mission. Our volunteers as well, though they may not be financially compensated, need to have meaningful roles to stay engaged with your organization. A final trend that is a little internally focused is that of board engagement. All board members need to be committed to the organization and the mission. They need to actively participate in meetings, events, fundraising, and the general mission of your nonprofit. Our nonprofit sector is the backbone of U.S. society, and nonprofit organizations rely on the leadership and engagement of board members to successfully sustain and grow their missions. We hope that you will engage with an organization that fits your passion.
All right, and then we're going to go back to governance fundamentals for the second video. All right, why governance is essential for nonprofit organizations. Learn about the 3 essential functions of governing boards, the life cycle of boards, and different types of adjacent boards that support the board of directors and the organization. This is the second of the 8. Applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. What type of board are you interested in joining, and what professional skills can you bring to the role? Are there adjacent boards that may be of interest, and why?
I'm Liz Howard, the Executive Director of the Kellogg School Center for Nonprofit Management and a clinical professor at the Kellogg School. Today we're going to talk a little bit about governance in the nonprofit sector and why governance is important to our nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit organizations in the U.S. today have a unique leadership partnership between the paid senior staff leader, often called the CEO or the Executive Director, and the volunteer board of directors or sometimes board of trustees. Nonprofit organizations may have a variety of boards that may have different purposes. The primary board is the governing board. The governing board is the focus of this Nonprofit Board Essentials series. Governing boards have the fiduciary responsibility for the organization, while the staff has the operational responsibility. Governing board members have a duty to care for the organization and its assets, the duty of loyalty to ensure that they are putting the organization's interests ahead of their own, and the duty of obedience to all local, state, and federal laws. In practice, the governing board acts in the best interest of the public and stewards the mission of the organization. Specific board roles and responsibilities are described in more depth in other videos throughout this series. But I will say not all governing boards are the same. As organizations grow and become more sophisticated and add more staff, the board needs to evolve as well. Many organizations start with a founding or organizational board that includes friends of the founder, or perhaps a committed group dedicated to a specific mission. These boards have heavy operational activity. In some cases, the board members may actually be delivering service. These boards spend some time talking about strategy and the future, but they are much more focused on the day-to-day operations of the organization. As that organization grows and adds staff members, board members evolve and the board becomes a governing board. This governing board has more strategic discussion, particularly about the future. They focus on bigger picture issues and have very little, if any, operational responsibility. That becomes the responsibility of the staff. However, governing board members are still involved with and responsible for fundraising and the financial sustainability of the organization. Another role that governing boards play is in the growth and innovation of the organization, and most importantly, holding the CEO or executive director accountable for the work of the organization. At a different level, there are some very large organizations. Think Northwestern University, for example, or a large health system. Those organizations have institutional boards. Institutional boards have no operational involvement and a very high-level strategic focus. They are thinking very generatively about the big picture future of the organization. And most of those board members at an institutional board level are making major financial contributions to that nonprofit organization. There are other types of boards, and many organizations have different boards, with a little b, to support the mission and engage specific audiences. These boards would not have the fiduciary or legal responsibility for the overall performance of the organization. I'll highlight a couple of those kinds of boards for you now. A young professional board, sometimes known as an auxiliary board or an associate board, engages young professionals, by their definition of young, in the organization. These young professional boards often host fundraisers, provide volunteers for aspects of the mission, and promote the organization to their peer group. Young professional boards can be a terrific opportunity for a nonprofit to build a leadership pipeline for the future of its governing board. Another type of board is a regional board. This would be a board potentially connected to a national organization, which would have a national governing board for the whole organization, but it would engage local or regional leaders in a regional board supporting the chapter in their city or community. While these boards usually would not have fiduciary responsibility, they do have fundraising, marketing, and local advocacy goals to engage local stakeholders. An additional board that a nonprofit may have is an advisory board. Based on the mission of the organization, some nonprofits would choose to engage professionals who have deep expertise in their mission area. As mentioned, these boards would not have legal authority, but would advise on mission-critical elements. Some examples might be a medical advisory board for a health-focused charity, a group of education experts committed to a specific school or education-focused nonprofit. Each type of board requires a different skill set and establishes its own set of responsibilities and expectations. But in each case, the board requires the passion, energy, and commitment of the board members. We hope that you will consider your skills and your passions and find the right place to share your time, your talent, and your treasure with a nonprofit board.
All right, going back to governance fundamentals for the third of 8 videos. Differences between nonprofit and corporate governance. Understand why nonprofit governance is different from corporate governance in the areas of purpose, compensation, fundraising, decision-making strategies, and workload. Applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. As you consider joining a nonprofit board, what questions can you ask to ensure you fully understand the roles and responsibilities?
Hi, my name is Dwight Hutchins, adjunct professor here at my alma mater, Kellogg, as well as a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group.
Make him a little slower because he's already a fast talker, so let's make him slower. Here we go. What?
Well, at the highest level, they're both about achieving the mission, and the board is there collectively to make sure that the organization actually delivers against achieving its mission. The corporate board is there to represent the shareholders, and the shareholders are there to receive sustainable growth and profits. And so the board is their voice into the corporation to make that happen. In a nonprofit, the board is there in support of the mission of the organization, and that mission, again, can be varied. And a lot of times they are there as not only oversight, but also active participants. The beauty of the compensation from a nonprofit board is the sense of personal fulfillment and satisfaction you get. Rarely is there monetary compensation. But other forms of compensation include the relationships you build and the camaraderie that you develop with like-minded and like-missioned individuals. On the other hand, corporate boards, there's varying degrees, obviously, of compensation that's monetary as well as product. There's many ways to serve a nonprofit. A big way to serve a nonprofit is help it in its fundraising objectives. And so, as a board member, either implicitly or sometimes explicitly, there's an expectation that you help develop the funds for the organization that you're serving on the board. And that can be anything from personal donations to levering your corporation's alignment with the mission of that organization to outright sponsor events or literally buy seats at the table, and that's a banquet table. Well, here I've had a lot of experience with this, serving as the chairman of the board of the American Chamber of Commerce in Singapore for 4 years and being on it for another 2. Very large board of 18 from every industry and actually every functional profession, from regional president to local government affairs. And what we found to be helpful is to always first focus on the mission. What are we here to accomplish? Let's be clear and sharp about that. Now let's have a conversation about the options to accomplish that, the pros and cons, and having a fact-based discussion, as well as understanding people's perspectives and passions, because it's not just math that we're doing here. If you're on, again, a nonprofit board, there is a mission-driven element to this that aligns closely with your values and, quite frankly, your passions. And so we have to account for that. But we can't let that run the decision-making process alone. It has to be a combination of, here's what I'm passionate about, here's what I have energy for, and here are the facts that show that it helps achieve the mission. The biggest surprise is the amount of work. Again, the expectation on a nonprofit board is that you're there to contribute and to roll up your sleeves versus just sitting in judgment and in expertise. So a lot of folks think they're there to lend their opinion, which is valued, but they're also expected to lend a hand. I really learned and grew as a board chair to make sure that I tapped into everyone's expertise around the board. And so I really saw it as an opportunity to be a shepherd and an orchestrator. By getting the voices of other members of the board involved, not only did you hear different perspective, you got more engagement and you got more commitment. And so that made the job easy.
All right, then we go back to governance fundamentals for the 4th of 8 videos. Let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Tips for successful board service. Explore strategies for impactful board service, including passion and commitment for the mission and the organization, integrity, and finding ways to engage with the organization and staff in meaningful ways. Applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. What nonprofit missions inspire you? Once you join a board, what are some ways that you can support the CEO, executive director, and or the staff? And this person, I don't know how fast they talk, but let's put them on 1.5. When people talk slow, it like makes me go crazy. I can't follow along, which is ironic because I am a bit of a slow talker. All right, here we go.
Hello, my name is Dr. Kathleen St. Louis Caliento, and I have the honor of serving as President and CEO of M.A.K.E Collective, as well as the privilege of being a past and current board member on several boards, including Adler University Board of Trustees, Leadership Greater Chicago's Leadership Fellows Association Board, and Hollister Confidence Fund Advisory Board. In my experience, both being part of a board and leading an organization with a board, I think there are certain core values that any prospective board member should have. For one, they have to have a passion and a commitment to the organization that they are joining. If a board member joins only because they are connected to the current leader or because they were given hints that they might inherit a specific role, there are likely to be some challenges to their long-term commitment to that role. These folks are not always drawn in, and they're not always necessarily values aligned. So, when you have people who are committed and have a deep sense of passion for what the organization is doing, the hope is that the next important value is also there, which is integrity. Integrity is critical for any board member. In the nonprofit space, we're often under-resourced. Many organizations are working on a shoestring budget. Staff are over capacity. And so organizations rely very heavily on the integrity of their board members. And that means that we need board members showing up in all the ways that they say that they will. I remember at a time at a previous organization I was running when I had a rock star board member. She was contributing her time, talent, her tribute, her treasure. She was putting pressure on other board members to make sure that they were doing their part in ways that leaders often can't. She was advocating on behalf of the organization. And so her integrity was already there. And when I asked her, obviously, to chair my board, she asked me why. And I said, because you're already doing the job. Organizations rely on these kinds of board members who are often more resourced, either through their personal networks or with the organizations that they're linked to. We rely on them to provide a level of support that we otherwise cannot accomplish on our own. And not just financial support, but strategic support, advisory support, advocacy, policy support, as well as professional support. The list goes on. There are lots of ways that leaders of nonprofits and social enterprises rely on board members, and so having them be a person of their word and having integrity is critical. For new board members, thinking about joining a board, I think the most important thing that they should look to is if the mission of the organization aligns with their personal and professional goals. Because as we know, being a board member is a volunteer opportunity. So you need something that's going to keep you coming back and incentivizing you to continue to volunteer and to contribute your valuable resources. And that so often begins with the mission. In addition to the mission, new board members should have a clear understanding of the commitment. What are the financial requirements? What are the time commitments? Some boards are advisory in nature, but many have a fiscal responsibility to the sustainability of the organization. I remember being asked to be on a board that had 8 board meetings a year. As much as I cared about that organization, I knew that I couldn't make that schedule commitment, so I had to opt out of that opportunity. A new board member should also explore if the leader of the organization is someone that you can get behind, and someone whose leadership you respect, admire, and are not afraid to advocate for. You should also be able to constructively challenge the leader in an appropriate manner and ask good questions. One question a new board member should want to know is whether the organization is in good standing. Do the due diligence, whether that's through GuideStar, Charity Navigator, ProPublica, or any of the institutions that evaluate nonprofits. Before joining a board, there's a lot of great questions that I wish a prospective member would ask, like how can I support? Or what shouldn't I do? Or how can we support your staff directly? But one question that I do wish I heard more is what other opportunities are there to engage socially with other board members? Board membership is a volunteer role, and it's not often an easy one. It's made easier when you can work alongside people that you can connect with. Not everyone is going to be your best friend, but I want prospective board members to think about the personal investment that they are making. You're not just committing to doing the hard work, which obviously, if you're joining a board and volunteering your time, we're going to assume that that's what you're signing up for. But you should also be committed to making those human connections. Because again, when the work continues to be hard, those personal connections are what keep you going. It is very important for the board to invest in the well-being of the staff that they serve. I think it is so encouraging when board members ask about the culture of the staff and what they can do to show that they care about them. This can show up in small gestures, like when we had our board serve a special staff breakfast or sign holiday cards with a small cash gift. And it can show up by providing resources and addressing capacity issues that are often faced by our staff. One example of this was when I had a board member who was able to coordinate through his company an intensive professional development training series for our entire leadership team. It was a significant investment that we wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. But having that, knowing that the staff wants opportunities to grow, and then being able to provide it, that's huge. One thing that I wish boards did more of is creating more opportunities for the human connection. For example, the Board of Trustees for Adler University carves out time at the beginning of every board meeting for personal updates. At Kara Collective, we start by grounding in a mission moment, which is very lovely. We don't always have the luxury of time, and there's so much to discuss and to want to jump right in. But an important learning is how we make sure that what we're providing is opportunities for those human connections, and not just volunteering people to do everything. That ultimately brings the board much closer. One thing that I had to tell all new board members is that proximity is key. It's one thing to have a commitment to the mission, and it's another thing to periodically make sure you are connecting with the people that the organization is serving on a day-to-day basis. It's important for board members to have personal stories of connection to the mission that goes much further than any drafted email that we provide them. It is so much more personal for them to say, I was at Kara last week and I talked to this amazing job seeker, and oh my gosh, what an incredible story. Let me tell you all about it. This is what Kara is doing every day. There are thousands of people that they serve every single year that look just like this person I met. Being able to have those personal and real stories by being proximate to the work is unparalleled. One thing I wish board members would do less of is say, what can I do? What do you need me to do? On the one hand, yes, as a leader, I need to be able to identify what the needs of my organization are and how I can leverage my board members to help fill those needs. But a good board member should also come with the introspection to say, here are the specific skill sets and resources that I can bring to the table. There's a balance between understanding the needs of the organization and leaders being able to articulate how they can help meet those needs. Now, we can't talk about board membership without discussing fundraising. It's a key component of why people get asked to join a board. Yes, for their additional skills, yes, for their network, for their expertise that they're able to bring, but also to help make the organization much more sustainable. And so it is imperative that board members take that role seriously, because quite often, budgets of these organizations rely directly on the financial commitments that they are assuming board members are going to follow through on. So having a board that is excited about fundraising is key. And I think it goes back to the point of proximity, because the more proximate you are to the work, the less you feel you're asking people for money. You're telling the story about lives being changed and impact being made in a city that you love and that you care about. Who wouldn't want to buy into that? So again, the more you're able to be closer to the work, the better. Last, I would say that we have to find creative ways to inspire the board to fundraise. For example, my board chair and I every year have an annual competition around the end of year giving season to see who can raise the most money. This often ends in one of us doing push-ups or some other physical feat. When we make it exciting, it's galvanizing, and it generates critical funds for the organization. If you have a chance to volunteer your time, talent, or treasure, take it. Being on a board is a privilege, an opportunity, and a great responsibility. All that said, it will be one of the greatest experiences of your life.
Going back to governance fundamentals, that was the fourth. And now we're going to look for the fifth of 8 videos for this portion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why the mission matters. Examine the attributes of a strong mission statement. Why it's important for board members to stay focused on the organization's mission, and how this focus makes board members more effective. Applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. There are many subsectors of the nonprofit sector with many different types of missions, all serving different stakeholders. Some examples of these sectors are health and human services, education, arts and culture, environmental protection, social advocacy and human rights, community development, international development, and religious and civic organizations. Begin thinking about the types of organizations and missions that interest you and start looking for those types of organizations in their community. They didn't mention animals. What about animal organizations? For all of us animal lovers. All right, and let's put this person on 1.5. Here we go.
Hello, I am Gregory White, and I'm celebrating my 17th year as president and CEO of Learn Charter School Network. We operate 12 pre-K through 8th grade charter schools in 4 different cities. I've also served on over 11 for-profit and not-for-profit boards, so I'll also share my perspective as a board member. I plan to spend the next few minutes talking about why boards must understand and be focused on the mission of their organization. When I became the CEO of Learn, I asked 10 different people a very simple question. What is Learn's mission? I received 20 different answers. In fact, no one was able to articulate a clear, concise, and compelling organizational mission. I thought, whoa, this is a problem. Because how do we make sure the board and staff are aligned and working hard for the same outcomes? And how will we know if we are successful if there's not a clear consensus on what we are trying to accomplish? I want to spend a few minutes discussing 3 critical questions. What are the attributes of a strong mission statement? Why is it important for board members to stay focused on their organization's mission? And how does this focus make board members more effective? A mission statement should be clear, concise, and compelling articulation of why does your organization exist? 2, what is your profound promise to the stakeholders you serve? And 3, how do you plan to hold yourself accountable over the long term? I want to share an example of one of my favorite mission statements. It's Whole Foods Supermarket. And their mission statement is to nourish people and the planet. I love it. It's clear, concise, and compelling. And once you have this clear, concise, and compelling statement, it should serve as the organization's North Star. In many respects, a mission...
I want to pause real quick. My husband works in advertising and marketing, and we live in Las Vegas where there's a lot of billboards. and he taught me that a good billboard should only have 7 words on it. And when you see a billboard that has more than 7 words, that's too much information for the brain to catch as you're driving by it on the highway. So the Whole Foods one that he just mentioned has 6 words. So that's really interesting. I would have thought that a mission statement would be more like 3 sentences, which is what they recommend when they talk about an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is if you were in an elevator with someone important that could help your cause, and you only have a quick little elevator ride, and they ask you, what do you do? Tell me about it. 3 sentences to give them your elevator pitch.
Mission statement serves as a staff and board's guiding light that ensures we're all pulling in the same and right direction. It allows the staff to develop and implement an effective strategy based on the board-approved mission. And from the board's perspective, a clear mission allows the organization to keep themselves accountable on a regular basis. Board members must ask, what have you promised to our shared stakeholders? And how are we doing compared to our promise? Finally, the mission statement helps the board prioritize. Every organization has finite financial and human capital, and many times the board must say no to new opportunities. It is so easy for an organization to lose focus and chase after the newest opportunity. However, an effective board must have the discipline and focus to only pursue new opportunities that directly align with their mission. This clear understanding of the organization's mission, therefore, is an essential tool when the board has to make a tough or pivotal decision. And effective board members must be courageous and ask, is this action consistent with our mission? Is this why we exist? Is this what we promise to the communities we serve? Is this our unique and valuable contribution? I want to share an example with you. Learn Charter operates 12 elementary schools. Our clear, concise, and compelling mission statement is, quote, to provide our scholars with the academic foundation and ambition to earn a college degree. Given our success, we're often told, you should open a high school to fulfill your mission. But when the board examined our mission, they realized that the 2 crucial elements, the academic foundation and ambition, are not developed in high schools, but in elementary schools. Therefore, elementary schools is where we should retain our focus so we can achieve our mission. In closing, I'm encouraging you to make sure you understand and are focused on your organization's mission. Is it clear, concise, and compelling? Can your staff use it as their guiding light so that all of you are pulling in the same direction with the same goal? Please use it as you make important decisions, and please have the courage to boldly ask, are we keeping our profound promise? Thank you.
All right, so then we go back to governance fundamentals, and we're looking for the 6th video out of 8. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Fiduciary duties of nonprofit board members. Understand the importance of the fiduciary duties of nonprofit board members, including the duties of loyalty, due and reasonable care, good faith, avoiding conflicts of interest, and avoiding self-dealing. Applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. As you consider serving a nonprofit organization as a board member, what questions can you ask the CEO Executive Director that will help you fulfill the fiduciary duties? And let's put them on 1.5 speed.
I am Mark McCarrans. I'm a clinical professor in the strategy department at Kellogg's Graduate School of Management, and today I would like to discuss the fiduciary duty of nonprofit board members. At the root of all obligations and responsibilities of nonprofit board members and officers is the fiduciary duty. The fiduciary duty is one of the highest legal standards, and it encompasses several distinct areas, including the duty of loyalty, the duty of due and reasonable care, the duty of good faith, the duty to avoid any real or
I'll real quickly comment. The reason why this is super important is, unfortunately, in the nonprofit sector, it is rife with nefarious dealings. The number of nonprofits that have people who embezzle money or abscond. I think abscond means when you run off away with it. But anyways, nonprofits unfortunately have a lot of that. So you have to be very, very careful with who is on your board of directors, who is your executive director, or otherwise known as a CEO. That's why this is super important.
Perceive conflicts of interest and the duty to not usurp opportunities for yourself that would otherwise be taken by your organization. That is, no self-dealing. While it may be thought that the fiduciary duties of officers and directors for public, for-profit companies should be different than for a volunteer serving on a nonprofit board, generally those duties are not legally different. Your compliance as a nonprofit officer or director with your fiduciary duties is tested by an objective standard. That is, what would a reasonable, disinterested person do in the same circumstances? Clearly, if you have subjective bad faith or bad intent in the course of carrying out your board functions, you will violate your fiduciary duty. However, in most instances, board members possess subjective good faith, and then it becomes a question of whether their conduct passes this objective standard. In order for a nonprofit board member or officer to better ensure compliance with the fiduciary duty, specific steps can be taken in lockstep with general sound governance principles, and among them include creating and using good board documentation in terms of agendas and fact-based minutes of meetings to explain not only the action taken, but also how the decision was arrived at. While a form of privilege does not usually attach to board discussions, unless legal or accounting advice is being provided, board members and officers must consider that maintaining the confidentiality of internal discussions is part and parcel of their respective fiduciary duties. Always allow for sufficient notice for board action of proposed activities that could impair the organization in any way. That is, getting an agenda with an action item that requires much thought the night before a board meeting is generally not advisable. Another example is if the board and officer review of the annual IRS Form 990 and submitting a draft to the board the night before a meeting to approve the form for filing would generally not be good governance. When expertise is needed, like finance, legal, or insurance, always try to enlist board members with expertise in the area in question. And if no board members have such experience, attempt to recruit ex officio members to brief the board on these matters. Conduct the business of the board in accordance with the organization's bylaws. If the bylaws need refreshing or updating, that is a good task for the board to make sure that all board actions are carried out in accordance with the bylaws. Use existing committees, those recognized by the bylaws, to assist with governance. For example, cybersecurity breaches represent a significant risk for most organizations. Is there a committee charged with risk management issues that would include cyber breaches or hacks? Making hasty or rash decisions without all the facts invites an investigation of the board's decision-making process. While generally the board cannot be perfect in its predictions, when a board makes a flawed decision using a flawed process, questions about compliance with the fiduciary duty will follow. Stifling dissenting views or cutting short discussions to avoid controversy for the sake of keeping the meeting on time is not good practice. If a particular issue requires further review and discussion, then table that issue to the next meeting or appoint a committee to investigate the topic further and report back at the next meeting. Fiduciary duties apply not only to actions taken, but to situations in which the board and/or officer is blind to a particular situation. For example, with respect to the previously mentioned cybersecurity threat that all organizations face today, failure of the board and/or officers to anticipate such a risk and put a program in place to guard against such risks may constitute a breach of the fiduciary duty. One consideration for a board member or officer is whether the nonprofit organization has enrolled in a director and officer's liability insurance policy, commonly called D&O. Such policies reimburse the organization and covered individuals for legal expenses incurred for suits brought alleging some sort of malfeasance by the board or an officer. Such policies for most nonprofits are not overly expensive, and the annual review of a D&O insurance policy should be a regular part of the board's governance protocols. In sum, it is an honor and a privilege for one to serve as a nonprofit board member or officer, especially when the mission of the nonprofit coincides with those of the officer or board member. However, it is also important to recognize that adherence to the fiduciary duties is mandatory when one accepts such an appointment to the board.
That's interesting. Let's go back to governance fundamentals, and we're looking for video 7. We're almost done. Video 7 of 8. So just go down to the bottom. And inclusive board practices. Explore best practices to ensure all voices are heard around the board table, including how to foster inclusive discussions during meetings and approach governance with a commitment to transparency and shared decision making. applied thinking. As you watch the video, consider the following. What inclusive practices have you employed in your professional roles? Can they apply to nonprofit board service? Why or why not? .5 speed.
Hello, I'm Cedric Thurman, Executive Vice President at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. I'm here today to talk to you about a couple of questions related to not-for-profit.
I'll slow him down. He's already a naturally fast talker. Let's put him back to normal.
Board essentials. So let's jump right in. The first question we're going to address today is how can board members and boards collectively be more inclusive of diverse voices in meetings and or discussions? Then the second question we're going to address is how can boards have a DEI lens on all aspects of governance, transparency, decision-making rights, retention? But before we answer those questions, you're going to have to think about where do you begin as you're trying to answer those questions. There are 4 things I want you to keep in mind during this discussion. Do you know the culture of your board? Every organization, every group of people has a culture. Do you know that for your board? How are board members selected? That's going to become important as we talk through this. How are board members onboarded? It's more than just bringing them onto the board. How do you actually onboard them into board culture, into the organization itself? And does representation of the board reflect the organization's mission and who the organization serves? Keep those 4 things in mind as we talk today. So let's jump into the first question. How can board members and boards collectively be more inclusive of diverse voices in meetings or discussions? Let's start with individual board members. Active listening. Now this sounds simple. Everybody says they're an active listener. The challenge is when you go to board meetings, there are always dominant voices in a room. Not-for-profit boards, for-profit boards, any meeting, any committee, there are always dominant voices. It's really important that you're listening to all the voices, especially those who might be less vocal in the room. How do you make sure you're engaging them? Encourage participation. Invite all participants to speak, particularly those from underrepresented groups. Underrepresented groups will have different meaning depending on your organization. For example, you may be an organization thinking about breast cancer, and there are a lot of women on your board. The underrepresented population may be the male voice in the room. Are you listening to that perspective by chance? Be mindful of bias. People say I don't have biases. Everybody likes to believe they don't have them. That's not true. We all have biases. It's the way our brains work. We all have biases. But those biases will impact who you call on in a meeting, who you listen to in a meeting, and sometimes who you won't listen to in a meeting. So be mindful of your bias because it could guide who you call on for different perspectives. You may call on the CFO because you're talking about something related to the budgeting. But maybe the marketing person has a really good input that they want to provide, but your bias says you don't call on them regularly. Mentorship. A lot of times people think, I brought somebody onto the board, they're successful, they're talented, they don't necessarily need a mentor. But your board is new and potentially different for them. Maybe it's their first board. Maybe it's the first time they served on a not-for-profit board. Mentorship is really important because going back to what I said earlier, boards have a culture. That mentorship is important because it helps people understand board culture and how do you onboard them. They need to understand how do you fit into the board. Most people, when they join organizations or boards, they're slow to work in their conversation because they're trying to learn and understand. The mentorship helps them understand how they can bring their voice to that table. Let's talk about boards collectively. Diverse recruitment. Diverse recruitment, again, the example I gave earlier was maybe it's an organization looking at breast cancer and you have men on the board. And so sometimes people think, why do we need a male voice in that conversation? Men get breast cancer too. Maybe you want somebody who has a lived experience there. And so how do you think about that? So diverse recruitment is not just gender, race, or age, or professional background. That's important. But there are a lot of ways you've got to think about, again, the mission of the organization, and do you have enough diverse voices in the room to help you solve the mission of the organization that you're there? An inclusive agenda. This always sounds very simple because people say our agenda is very inclusive. Not necessarily sometimes when you take a step back. Are you allowing time for everyone to contribute? Are you allowing time for topics to hit the agenda where people can say, have we thought about this? Have we talked about that? You've got to be very inclusive in just the agenda itself because it can influence who's going to contribute in a meeting and who's not going to contribute in a meeting. Training and development. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Does the board go through any training on diversity, equity, and inclusion? A lot of times people say, oh, I get that at my job, or I get that in another environment, or I understand all those issues. I don't necessarily have to be trained on it. But depending on the mission of the organization, because again, we're talking about not-for-profits, diversity, equity, inclusion training can be critically important for board members because you're serving constituencies that you may not have the same lived experiences they have. So that training can help you understand how you better relate to those with that lived experience that you're serving on a daily basis. Feedback mechanisms. Are there ways for you to get input from your board members? Again, you have an agenda, you're talking about topics, but do you know it's really working for everybody? How do you get that feedback? Sometimes board chairs will say, I meet with people individually to get their feedback. They're generally going to tell you what you want to hear as the board chair. So do you have anonymous feedback mechanisms? So somebody can say, person A is dominant in the room, they don't leave space for others. They may not tell that to a board chair, but with anonymous feedback, they will say that information, which becomes helpful for you to figure out how do you engage others in the process. Rotate roles. You want to make sure that there's normally a board chair or a vice chair or committee chairs and things of that nature. But what does succession planning look like? So all of those roles rotate around, because the more you can rotate the roles, it helps with that onboarding that I spoke about earlier. So people realize there will be the opportunity for me to serve differently in this organization. And when I can serve differently, I learn more about the organization. When I learn more about the organization, I can contribute differently to the organization. So rotate roles. How can boards have a DEI lens in all aspects of governance? Transparency, decision-making rights, retention. Let's start with transparency. Open communication. As we've talked about earlier, you've got to make sure that you're getting information from everybody in the room. But you also want to make sure you're sharing information related to the mission. So if you're focused on things related to DEI, are you sharing goals? Are you sharing progress against those goals? Any challenge you're having to success? But information that helps people understand this is our mission, this is how we're trying to accomplish it. But are we sharing that information and creating conversation around it? Not just sharing it for people to see and read. Are you creating conversation and dialogue around it? The dialogue engages people and creates that environment where open communication can happen. Inclusive reporting. One of the things you don't want to do is make sure you're keeping things under the vest and people don't understand what's happening and don't know what's going on. You want to have that reporting include all of the things that are important, and you're getting diverse perspectives and experience in there. I talked about those lived experiences. That's one of the ways that you're making sure you're getting that reporting out. If you have people with lived experiences helping share how the mission of the organization is impacting them or other things they need so the mission of the organization can positively impact them, that's part of that inclusive reporting. Data transparency. We all know data is important. We all know people what measures gets done. But are you making sure that the data you're collecting connects to the mission of the organization and has a positive impact on those lived experiences of the people you're trying to serve? That data transparency becomes critically important because, again, it contributes to engagement, it contributes to communication, it contributes to people wanting to serve on your board. So as you go to recruit board members, you have a stable of people who want to be in the room as opposed to you trying to convince somebody to be in the room. Let's talk about decision rights. Diverse committees. Are you making sure that, again, if it's the finance committee, is everybody on the finance committee an accountant, a CFO, or a treasurer? Or are you making sure that the committees themselves have diverse perspectives? You want to make sure that people who are serving on the board don't get pigeonholed to doing what they do every single day. They may have other board experiences that they can add value to things that don't naturally seem like they have that background. So how are you thinking about committee structures, who's leading committees, in the conversations that are happening there? Equitable participation. Again, sounds simple, sounds logical to a lot of people, but this ensures all of your board members feel like they have the opportunity to participate and contribute. So if you're creating the environment where there's open communication, you're creating an environment where there's transparency in data, you're going to help contribute to equitable participation. Don't assume you do one of these things, all of them happen. You have to be very intentional in making sure all of these things happen concurrently. And then bias training. We talked earlier about bias. Everybody thinks they don't have it, but we all have it. There's nothing wrong with that. We just need to recognize we have it, but then you also have to do training on bias. There's conscious bias and unconscious bias, but we need to make sure we're training people on it because there's subtle ways that we don't sometimes realize the ways in which our bias decides who we're going to, again, call on in a meeting, not call on a meeting, who we think's a good board member, who we don't want to invite to a board. That bias can come into play, and so we need to do training on that. Retention. We want to create an inclusive culture. If we're bringing people to our board, We want them to be on our board. We want them to tell others about our board. We want them to tell others about our organization and the mission of the organization. If you're creating an inclusive culture, then that way your board members feel like they can add value. You want to foster that culture where they feel like they can bring all of the things themselves to that meeting. If they sit on multiple other boards, maybe they're hearing things in those other boards that could be valuable to this board. And so that you want them to be able to share that there. Or maybe they're hearing things that say, I saw this in another board. We're not doing that. Why don't we do that? And that inclusive culture helps bring that information in. Mentorship programs. We talked about this earlier. Mentorship is critically important. As I said earlier, when you got to think about how do people get to your board, what's the culture of your board, how do you onboard people into your board, those things people can sometimes take for granted. But that participation is going to be critical. And so you've got to think through, how do I make sure somebody understands the culture of our board, how they were selected, why they were selected, what do we expect them to be able to do in these meetings? That mentorship will allow all of that information to get shared and get people in the organization set up correctly to be a successful board member. And then again, feedback mechanisms. You need to make sure that you're getting information back from your board members so they understand how they can address the mission of the organization, how they can contribute and add value back. That feedback is critically important because as you do all of these things collectively, you want to make sure that, again, your board members are saying, this is valuable. I feel like I can contribute. I can feel like I can add value to the mission of the organization. Those feedback mechanisms are critically important. Thank you for your time today. Hope you learned something. Hopefully you can apply this to your not-for-profit board. And hopefully the mission of those organizations becomes very successful because you found a way to be a very valuable board member and a very valuable board. Thank you.
We are almost done. We have only one more video in this portion of governance fundamentals. And then that will be all for this video. Oh, wait. 2 videos. Oh, never mind. They tricked us. A conversation about the boards of community-based organizations. Gain insights from a facilitated conversation between a CEO and board president about important considerations for anyone considering joining a community-based board. So just to reiterate, the board president is the person who is leading the board of directors, who are overseeing the big picture and the budget, and the CEO is the executive director or executive officer. They're the ones who's more like an operational manager who is actually doing the day-to-day work of running the organization. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is one video and it's between these 2 ladies. Topics covered. In this video, Evelyn Fitzgerald, CEO of SVP Chicago, and Cindy Paluaska, I can't say her last name, CEO of Rivert 360 and former board chair of SVP, engage in conversation and share perspective on the following topics. Each question is listed with its approximate time stamp. Oh boy. Ooh, we can read that as we go. All right, this is our last one. 23 minutes? Whew. Hold on. We will save that. Because you've already been talking for an hour. So I hope you all have a wonderful day and you learned something. Thank you for your patience as I was doing a live stream for M.A.K.E Nevada. And I hope you learned something, and we will do this video in another video. So have a wonderful day, and I hope that you learned something. I know I did.